Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 27 of this 10th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalog, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Today's episode is a wonderful, sprawling conversation that I had with the inimitable Eric Senich. Eric and I met through the Van Halen show and the podcast Will Rock, which is hosted by my good pal and Ultimate Catalogue Clash co-host, Corey Morrissette. Eric's knowledge of rock and roll is staggering, at times actually intimidating, how much this guy knows. You know, as is his insatiable thirst for knowledge about all things to do, every facet of rock and roll, the industry, the artistry, the people, the stories, and couple that with an excellent recall for facts and timelines and that kind of stuff. It's just, he's a mine of information. And on top of this, he's just genuinely a nice fella. And we spent a couple of really enjoyable hours visiting and chatting about music and, of course, Tom's career and Tom's work. Make sure you check out Booked on Rock, which is Eric's podcast. I'll leave a couple of relevant links to specific episodes. I was a guest on the show. I had a great time talking to Eric about a couple of Tom Petty books. I'll leave those in the episode notes. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Eric Senich.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty Project. Tom Petty. Hey, Tom Petty Project.
So was that? Let's just dive into that point then, because this is a good place to start.
We're recording. Is this video and audio or just
video and audio? I do for my conversations.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right.
So we got
it's my toupee. It's a whole. Does it stay in there?
That's a 3-pay. That's a fucking 3. Crib that line from an old 10cc song.
3-pay. Yeah, that's great. That's great. What were you gonna say? You're gonna ask.
Yeah. So. Well, let's maybe start. We'll back up a wee bit and we'll go sort of where did you grow up and what was music life in your house growing up? Like, are you from a musical family? Like, what's your background with music?
Yeah, I grew up in Connecticut, still live in Connecticut. And music was a big part of my household. As from a listener perspective, my two older brothers, I credit with, my love of rock and roll. I have my brother Chad is 2 years older than me, and then my older brother Marty is 7 years older than me. So I discovered Van Halen really essentially through my brother Chad, because he had 5150 the cassette. So and he had all of like the cassettes. He had all like the 80s stuff, and then my oldest brother had the vinyl. He had Pink Floyd and Zeppelin and Stones, all on vinyl. So, and then that combined with radio, listening to radio, that's where I was exposed to music. Music, I'm musically somewhat skilled a little bit. I could play little drums here and there, but I was more just fascinated with, because I'm not a skilled musician. I think that's why I'm so fascinated with music so much. Like, how the hell do you guys do it? Meaning you, what you do is fucking amazing. I just, to be able to construct a song, I'm able to write, and I can construct an article, and lead paragraph comes to me, or something will come to me from a writing standpoint. So I guess it's like that, and ideas for articles or whatever. But from a musician standpoint, there's just something, the feeling that I got from listening to music in certain bands. Like when I heard 5150 for the first time, I was just like fucking blown away. It just made me feel so good. And I was like 16, 17 years old, and teenage years are tough. And so basically getting back to that's my dad he loved music. My dad loved, he was born in 1939. So he was a fan of the standards. He was a fan of Sinatra and Dean Martin.
Yeah.
Stuff that at first I rebelled against, but then as I got older, I got it, and then, and so he would get me into his stuff, and I would get him into my stuff, because we used to be in car rides together. I would just slowly work in a Grateful Dead song or a Pink Floyd song, because I knew he'd like it, because those bands they're rooted in like our Allman Brothers band, they're rooted in like jazz and blues and folk and bluegrass, and with Pink Floyd, it's just Pink Floyd is Pink Floyd, but it's like this elegant, dreamy sound to it. It's not offensive, in your face, loud, something that, your parents would be like, ugh. And when he first heard Dark Side of the Moon, I mean, he was like, wow, what's that?
Yeah.
Grateful Dead. He was blown away when I told him the Grateful Dead never played, it's the same show twice, never played the same set list twice,
Right.
never played a song the same way twice. And he was like, really, And what was cool was too, is I do recall there was a funny Van Halen moment when I don't know if it was on the radio or I was playing it or whatever, but he was so into the fact that the song off of the first record,
Oh, I'm the one.
I'm the one, right? And he's
Yeah.
like, oh, whoa. So he was connecting with that because David Lee was a fan of the stuff that my dad was into, So Dave was incorporating that shit into Van Halen. He's like, that's cool. Like he remembered that part only. The rest was a little too hard and heavy for him. But here's the cool thing. My dad was a DJ. He did everything in radio. He was sportscaster, newscaster, talk show host, but he was a DJ as well. And I urge people to go onto YouTube and just type in Jim Senich air check, because he gave me one of his air checks from the early 60s. And
Okay.
in it, he's reading the news at the top of the hour, how John F. Kennedy approved the Apollo mission, blah, 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 blah. It was like, it's just a mind blow.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. And but in later years, he used to do weekends at a local radio station in the 80s, and he was playing Jump. He loved Jump.
Yeah.
And he was playing The Police, Synchronicity, or Wrapped Around Your Finger. So he was digging on that stuff because it was his job to stay in the know on what was current. So he was into that. But my brother Marty to this day is a huge, just loves Jethro Tull, Neil Young. He's a big Head Todd and the Monsters fan, Allman Brothers. And then my brother Chad, same thing. We just love music. There's just something about music, and and my mom too. But yeah, that's really where it came from. And my dream was, when I first heard a rock and roll DJ, I said, Jesus, I have to be that. I have to be a DJ. I have to be a rock and roll. I just lived it and breathed it from the time I was 16 till when I finally got in the air in it was like early to mid 90s when I joined college radio. And then I finally got my first official gig. Like, I don't know if I should, that's the FM radio tattoo right below the Van Halen. You got the VH there, hit the ground running from Unchained, but then there's the FM radio dial.
That is so cool, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up raised on radio, like the Journey album, right?
Yeah. Well, of course, but we all did, right? Because obviously we're in a different generation where we had to listen to the radio, then we bought LPs and we actually sat and wielded those bloody great big things around. But you mentioned something there that I think is interesting when you're talking about, Allman Brothers Band, or you're talking about some of these early rock bands, or even think about Black Sabbath, and you think about who their influences were. Well, they weren't influenced by rock or hard heavy metal because it didn't exist. Right, what they were doing, they were creating this different sound, but it was coming from Chuck Berry and Buddy Rich and Frank Sinatra and all these influences. They were just bending it into this new paradigm. So I always think that's really interesting, where you get these pioneers in rock. Their influences are not typically rock and roll. They're all these other
Bill
guys,
Ward, right?
Bill
Jazz.
Ward and Ginger Baker,
Ginger Baker, yeah.
Charlie Watts. These are jazz drummers because that's what there was, right?
Absolutely, and then it was almost. I still have yet to find the absolute beginning of the dual drummer thing in rock and roll, because that has to be taken from the jazz thing.
Oh, it's got to be the big band thing. Absolutely.
And the Allmans with the two drummers, the Dead with the true. I mean, what a unique, interesting concept. Like, just who was like, let's have two drummers, just that whole thing. But yeah, I mean, that comes from the big band and the jazz and like Glenn Miller was the guy who my dad always used to tell me, like, he was the rock star of his time, and he was innovative. So he was thinking of shit that nobody else did. He was the one that I think he was the guy that had the two instruments playing at the same time, maybe slightly different keys. So it created this sound, all that shit. It's all connected. Yeah. You go all the way back even to classical. I mean, some of the obvious stuff like, Guns N' Roses, November Rain, you can hear the classical influences. I mean, it's all there, and it just continued to to grow right up through probably like the late 90s. And it just sucks. We haven't had, I was just telling somebody, when was the last time we've had an influential rock band or artist? It's been over 20 fucking years.
It really was Nirvana, right? It was the last
depressing.
They were the last kind of big left hand, like big left turn. Let's go. And I mean, I think Jack White White Stripes in a much smaller way, because they just
early 2000s,
they
late
did it differently, right? They just did, but they were still kind of doing blues rock. It wasn't really a big sea change into a different direction. But I don't think we've had anything since then. And I think some of it comes from that homogeneity of, and maybe we'll talk about this about radio. You know, radio stations are told what to play, and so you're all playing the same thing. Everyone's playing the same thing, so everything's kind of got to sound a certain way to get on the radio, which means that we end up, you know, they go and they'll search the bars for, or search, you know, YouTube for artists who fit that mold.
It breaks my heart to actually say, you know, what I say about radio nowadays, because it was my life. I mean, I was raised on it, listening to it. I was raised on it, living in the radio stations with my dad as a little kid, watching him be on the radio, playing the records, and then becoming a DJ was a friggin' dream come true. But in the mid 90s, and you get to around 96, and Bill Clinton allowed the corporations to buy out endless amounts of radio stations. It all became homogenized. So then you didn't have the local stations anymore. I discovered Blues Traveler through my local radio station in New Haven, Connecticut, you know, the home of Live Without a Net.
Yeah.
And I remember them playing But Anyway long before. This is before Runaround was a hit. This is before But Anyway was re-released after Runaround and became a hit. You know, it's just like, who is it? You know, and then the wait for the DJ to say, you know, the Blues Traveler from New York City. I was like, fuck, this band is so good. Spin Doctors and, you know, all those bands, and local stations would take a chance on a band if there was something that they liked. But then that just changed, and you knew the local DJs, you knew the individual personality of the radio stations for each city. The Hartford rock station had a different personality than the New Haven rock station, and on and on and on. And that went away, and the playlist narrowed down. And then I remember being so bummed out because I was in radio right up through about, I was in radio through around 2017, maybe 2018. I can't recall, but that was at the time too. I remember, like, if Springsteen had a new album out, now we're not going to play anything new. Yeah. When Petty had an album out, we did play something off of Mojo. We did play, what was the first single off of Mojo?
Jefferson Jericho Blues. I think.
No.
Was that the first one? Or I should have known it.
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
And I was like, yes, man, fucking Petty. And I love that album, but that dropped off pretty quickly, and it was back to Refugee. It was back to Free Fallin'. It was back to I Won't Back Down. And that's when I kind of knew, I'm like, yeah, this is, you know, we're up against the inevitable. And then as we get older now, you know, like the statistics show on Spotify, who listens to my podcast, which is classic rock related. So it's all music from essentially like mid 50s through early 2000s, but really like mid 60s through mid 90s. Yeah. And it's males between the ages of 45 and 65.
Yeah.
And, you know, you just can't capture the interest of people in their teens and 20s with rock and roll really all that much. And it's heartbreaking, man. I took my nephew to a ball game over the weekend. We went to Fenway Park, see the Red Sox in Boston, and I am a fan of rap. I dig Tupac, Biggie, Mac Miller. I thought was fucking brilliant. Post Malone, I think, is an amazing talent. Wu-Tang Clan. So it's not like I just have a disdain for rap. Yeah. But we were bouncing back and forth, Beasties. I was playing a lot of stuff that I liked, but he just wanted to listen to nothing but Kanye and Kanye West and Drake and what was the other one? Kendrick Lamar.
Right.
And I just was not feeling any of it. And he knows every single word. And he was just like, he was like me when I was his age. He's 19, talking about rock bands. He goes, see right here, he's talking about his blah, blah, blah. He knows all the facts.
Yeah.
He's like, listen to this. This is about his beef with Kendrick Lamar. And he's so into it. I'm just like, I'm just not feeling it. There's no emotional range here. There's nothing.
I think
for me.
And I get the same thing, Eric. My eldest daughter is big into rap, and she's Suicide Boys and some of these other artists who, when I sit and listen, I'm like, yeah, I get what this is. I understand where the emotion comes from on it. And when you read the lyrics, I'm like, yeah, totally on board with all that. But it's the sort of the monotony of them. There's no melody in a lot
monotony.
Of it.
There's no melody.
There's none, or there's none of change. It's all the same tempo. It's all the same rhythm.
Yes. And I'm not feeling the emotion in the delivery. Like I was saying, look, can we just play Tupac? Because he was always just kind of like, yeah, I guess I could let's just play a song or two, and
yeah.
And I think he was digging it, but I was trying to point out the fact we were playing a track from Tupac, God Bless the Dead, and you're hearing the angst in Pac's voice. You're hearing it pick up. He's getting angrier and angrier, and you're feeling something there.
Yeah.
And then you flip to like Dear Mama, where he's talking about how much he loves his mom. And then you get the song where he samples Hornsby's The Way It Is, and he's talking about how we need to change the way we think, the way we eat, the way we change, trying to change the world. And you're feeling, at least I am. I'm just feeling something there in the delivery, and I'm not feeling it with these dudes. I'm not feeling it at all. And it's thin. The beats are really thin, and like you say, monotonous.
Sonically, it's just not. And I think that's obviously it's just the subjectivity of music is you just can't get around that. People like what they like, and whatever hits you. But I think it's also there is that thing that we did grow up with. The band that we met through Van Halen. Those first two records, they are not perfect. They're perfect records, but they're not perfect sonically.
Imperfectly perfect.
They're imperfectly perfect. I mean, the timing's not always, it's not metronomic. The pitch is not always dead on, but that's what makes them. It's like I said, I always talk about my favorite example of this is Baba O'Reilly by The Who.
Yeah.
Because Keith Moon comes in on the drums at least 10 beats per minute too fast. And you can hear him slow down because he's playing to that sort of that keyboard track. But that imperfection in there, and it's the same thing with Petty and the Heartbreak. It's the same thing with Allman Brothers. What that does then is that it's real people making the music, and it's not being put through Pro Tools. And it's not to say that that's the best way of doing it, but that's what I connect with definitely, and especially I think because I grew up around musicians. My dad's a musician, he was a guitarist, he was in bands, so I used to go and watch him, and my uncle Dennis, who wasn't my uncle, all those aunts and uncles who aren't your aunts and uncles. But I used to go to his grocery store where they practice and sit on a box of oranges and watch four musicians make music. And so that connection to real music and real musicians, I don't know I'll ever get away from that.
Yeah, I don't, and I'm sure there's young people listening to this now saying, dude, what are you talking about, man? Fucking Drake, I'm feeling that. If they are, that's awesome, man. That's great. Yeah. You're getting something out of it. That's all that matters. It's just, a great story. Post Malone to me, is a guy who's got a music. He's like steeped in music history, and he's got this sense of melody and hooks and harmonies, and it's just song crafting. And there's a great story. Christopher Thorne, the guitarist from Blind Melon, I interviewed him, I don't know, 4 years ago. And Christopher Thorne was the guitarist, Blind Melon, No Rain, Dublin, and he has his own studio in, I think it was Vegas. And I brought up, who are you a fan of? And then I brought up Post Malone, and he goes, I met Post Malone. I go, really cool. Where'd you meet him? He said he was using my recording studio to record an album. He said the first day I met him, he walked in the room, introduced myself. Hey, how you doing, Christopher? Nice to meet you, Post. And Post Malone was like, he looked in the corner of the room and he saw a guitar leaning up against the wall, acoustic guitar. And he goes, can I, he's like pointing at it, like saying to Christopher, like, can I, like facial expression, like, can I play that? And Christopher was like, yeah, man, go ahead. Go for it. He picked it up. He said he was playing fucking Simon and Garfunkel and Zeppelin and Dylan. And you know what I mean? That, and Christopher Thorne was just like, wow, this fucking dude. So, that's it. It's there. It's there. Post Malone's now, I think maybe around 30 or so, but I don't know, man. It just scares me. It's like, we got it. I said to my nephew, I said, do any of your friends listen to rock and roll? He goes, nope.
Yeah, no,
I said, do they know any? A few of my friends know Pink Floyd. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
it's,
I
don't
have this
know what to
argument.
say.
I have this argument with my friend Randy, he's my co-host on the Seaside Pod Review, the Queen podcast. You know, he says rock and roll's dead, Kevin. Rock and roll's dead. And well, as a commercial, you know, as a
Yes.
commercial king, of course it is, and it has been for quite a while now. But rock and roll, I'm sort of in Neil Young camp here. Is rock and roll will never die
It'll never
because
die. No.
because you're still going to get a kid picking up a guitar and being influenced and inspired by, you know, whoever it is these days, or some of the old guys.
Yeah.
Like I think about a guy like Jake Thistle, who I've had on the show a couple of times, who is this, you know, 18-year-old or 19-year-old now kid who his influences are John Hyatt, Tom Petty,
Oh, cool.
Brian,
Yeah.
Springsteen, you know, so he's going out and he's
Yeah.
playing and recording music that is steeped in singer-songwriter, folk Americana, rock and roll. And he's not succumbing to that sort of, you know, because the logical thing for him to do would be, okay, well, I'll take all that, but I'll make it sound like Ed Sheeran. Because that
Right.
we know that sells, but he doesn't do that because it's not him, right? So I
Right.
don't think that rock and roll's ever going to go away. It's just
It's never going to go away. No.
Yeah,
Just to clarify, because you're correct. You're 100% right. It's never going to go away, in that there's always going to be, you know, the younger kids growing up, picking up a guitar, drums, whatever it may be, and rocking out. The problem is it's that you want to have an artist or a band that's making rock and roll music that's making a huge impact.
Yeah.
And they are crossing over now without selling out. I'm talking just crossing over because they didn't even plan on crossing over, but it just happened. And here we go. There's a whole new generation of fans that want to be that band, like the Beatles, like, you know, that's what I'm talking. Like, you go to the top 40 charts, there isn't one rock and roll song, band, or artist in the top 40. And there has not been for a long time. That is mind blowing to me. Absolutely. You go back to the years past, and you go, like, just pop in any year right up through 2000 or whatever. You will see someone in there, you know, I mean, some rock and roll band.
Yeah.
That just is mind. You have over 60 years of rock and roll behind us now. You like the radio stations and the major media, they just don't feel like the kids are give a shit enough about it. So I don't know how that's going to happen. You're going to have to have some kind of groundbreaking band or artist that's just going to get everybody's attention. And I don't know how, if you can do it now, because it's so spread out with the way you market yourself. But
it's saturated as well, right? The market's huge. It's a much, much bigger market now than it was in, you know, 76 when Petty came through, or 78 when Van Halen comes through.
Right.
There, you know, so it's a lot more difficult to sort of get yourself somewhere these days. But I think that part of that too is, and I'll bring this back to, again, sort of Van Halen, Queen, Petty, you know, your Dylans and your Beatles. I do believe, honestly, that there is a bit of luck there, and there is obviously the hard work and doing your time and everything. But I think those artists at that level, it's almost like you simply can't ignore them, right? They're too good for you to ignore. When Van Halen comes out with Van Halen in 78, you're forced to listen to that record because it's just so good.
During a time when that music was not in.
Absolutely.
It was disco, punk, and all these bands like Black Sabbath and they were like dinosaurs.
Yeah. Already in 78.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the same thing with Petty, because even though it was ignored at first, and thankfully John Scott, you know, got that record and made people listen to it. But when you listen to American Girl and Breakdown, it sort of blows my mind that any executive didn't think, oh shit, yeah, no, this guy can write. We need to sort of dump some money into this guy, get him promoted, because clearly he's on something. Now, the rest of that first album isn't all gold. I think they're all good, strong songs, but it's not all that level. But then, you know, you come through and you get Damn the Torpedoes. Well, now we're talking about 9 songs that it's that same thing, right? It's like, well, you can't ignore this anymore.
And we're talking about record labels giving an artist a chance to have a third album.
Well,
maybe a fourth, because a lot of times the back's up against the wall, and it's one album. Well, albums don't mean much anymore, but you know what I mean? You know, if this first product we put out there and get behind isn't going to do anything, you're gone.
Well, I love that Petty quote though. He says, you get your whole life to write your first album, you get 9 months to write your second. So,
Right. Right. But Petty, there's a guy who just worked on his craft as a songwriter, and just as somebody who said, look, I'm not Eddie Van Halen. Don Felder was his teacher in Florida, and Don Felder said, he's like, I'll be honest, I wasn't looking at it as like, whoa, this kid can play.
Yeah.
He said, but I knew there was something there. Like there was something that he got, that this kid, Tom, whoever, he's got it. There's something there. And then that's why Petty, I mean, let's talk Tom Petty, man. You think about, like, I came along in 1989. I became a Petty fan when Full Moon Fever came out. Yeah. And going back to my older brother. So my older brother, Marty, and his friends, they were big fans of Petty. So if they're fans, then if they think Petty's cool, then he's cool. Like, my older brothers were cool. So whatever they listen to, I'm listening to. Yeah. And then I Won't Back Down and Free Fallin' on MTV. And I was totally in, and I went and I would take, and we'd talk about cassettes. I had a part-time job on the weekends, and I maybe made like $50, and I would spend it, pretty much all of it, on cassettes. Yeah. And when I got into my Petty phase, it was like, try to 2 Petty albums each weekend, and then listen to them and become best friends with each of the albums. Yeah. Drive around with them, and I went back and got all that. I was like, wow, man, this fucking guy in Southern Accents was just like, I've told you, this is my favorite album, only because I remember listening to it in the fall. Right. And it had a fall vibe to it, and the cover looked fall. I don't know if it was just fall. You think about, so I'm of a generation, think about how many generations of fans he accumulated over those years. So he was already out like for a good 10 years before I even jumped on board. Yeah. So he had maybe a couple generations worth of kids who were listening to Damn the Torpedo saying, whoa, man, I gotta get this album. And then you go fast forward maybe a little bit to, like he kind of picked up on new fans with, You Got Lucky, a little different sound, but he was still attracting the teen and 20 somethings right up through, let's be honest, through friggin' Wildflowers. I mean, because even that was like the last, I think, you could tell me if I'm wrong, you're the Petty expert. Like, I think in 95 Wildflowers, he was still on MTV. He was still winning MTV Video Awards. He was still relevant among the young audience. It was like all of a sudden he was the cool dude. He was like Uncle Tom you can smoke a joint with, and his music was still cool. And so you just take all of those generations of fans. It's like a fucking Mountainville. I mean, like, that's why by the time at the end he could play wherever he wanted, he'd sell out. It's so many fans. To me, that he's one of the, for me, top five. Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting when you talk about, because Full Moon Fever was the entry point for a lot of people. The people who didn't pick up on the early albums. Well, that was the album, because like you said, you couldn't get away from it on MTV. Free Fallin' was everywhere. It's this huge anthem that every radio station's playing. So then when you listen to that album, you think, okay, that's Tom Petty. When you go back and listen to something like The Debut, or you listen to something like even like Southern Accents, which is markedly different sonically, tonally, lyrically, like, was that sort of obviously, like you said, if you listen to the bands that you were listening to, like The Dead and Allman Brothers, you must have found a connection. But what was that like, going back and sort of discovering that back catalog then? It was really interesting, because I'd known of the hits that were on the radio, but very different than that straightforward, straight ahead approach that he had on Full Moon Fever, which my assumption is what really created the rift between him and Stan Lynch. Because did you listen the Stan Lynch's drumming on those early records, they drive the overall sound. It's just like loose and it's so different. And and to hear Full Moon Fever, where it was all really it was simplified down in this brilliant way in which he did it too. That's what I love about Petty too, is like he could have continued and tried to do more fancy stuff, but he was like crafting songs now. He was like, I did all that shit. I want to just write a solid song that anybody can play, but few can write, if
Yes.
any, you know. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. In fact, I didn't even get the first album until like afterwards. Like I think I went. It was a weird order I went. I kind of bought the albums based on the songs I heard on the radio. I think that's really what like my barometer was like. Okay, I'm gonna look through the discography here and just see. So the debut was 76. You're gonna get it. You know, it's interesting. Like the Damn the Torpedo. So when I got Full Moon Fever. I think the next one I would have gotten, I started with Damn the Torpedoes. I skipped over those first two.
Yeah.
You know, because I didn't hear much about those. Then it was Hard Promises. Then it was Long After Dark, Southern Accents, Let Me Up, Have Had Enough. Went in that order. Then finally like, okay, let's go get the first two.
Interesting.
Weird, right? It's like I didn't want to embrace those first two as much as the others, but
it does make sense in a way, like you said, though, because if you go from Full Moon Fever, Damn the Torpedoes is, because that sort of Damn the Torpedoes, Full Moon Fever, Wildflowers, those are the big three, really, in Petty's catalog that most people consider to be the seminal works. So Damn the Torpedoes has got 4, 5 hits.
Yes.
On it, 4 songs on Greatest Hits, right? So if you're going to look for, because, like you're talking about, when you've only got limited funds back in the day before we had YouTube Music, and you had to think, well, I'm going to go for an album that I know 4 songs on this one, so I'm pretty much know I'm going to like that.
Yep.
So it's an investment, right? So that plays into your decision on what albums to buy.
But here's where this is when you're a fan of the artist, is when you get in between the hit singles, you play the whole album, and you're really connecting to the songs that were not on the radio. Now I'll say Damn the Torpedoes. It's obvious. It's a classic Petty album, and it's got all those hits. But I'm going to tell you, man, Hard Promises, front to back, start to finish.
Yeah,
that's when I was a Woman in Love. I know that was a single, but I'm not a huge hit single. I was like that dark.
Yeah, the intro, the opening section is so cool. Yeah.
And the way Petty's singing it, Petty just felt like he was like a friend of mine. But these songs became like my friends.
Yeah.
I just, I always try to clarify that, because it's like, we don't know who these people are, but their songs take on a life of their own, and you become friends with these songs, these albums. That's the music that you become really friends with. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because you got some people out there, the friggin' stalkers, like, hey, it's like they think they know, we don't know these person.
Yeah.
But we sure as hell know their music. Night Watchman, Something Big, Kings Road, Letting You Go. That was A Thing About You, Insider, The Criminal Kind. You can still change your mind after another. And I'll tell you another one that I think about when it comes to the whole album I love would be, I would say, Long After Dark. I mean,
absolutely. And I've said it on the podcast before, and I mean, I know that it's not sort of the common wisdom, but I think that 3-album run with Iovine, I think for me, each album actually gets better. I think that Hard Promise is incrementally better than Torpedoes, and I think that Long After Dark is incrementally better than Hard Promises in terms of the craft, in terms of the songwriting, the songs that come out. And when you get a song like Straight Into Darkness on Long After Dark, it just takes your legs out from under, because you're like, how the hell is this not like as big as Refugee?
I know. And how many times has he written a song like that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many musicians would die to be able to have a song like that come to them? Just one.
I know.
Just one. So I'm curious as to how hard Petty worked at his songwriting skills. Did it just come to him? I always got the feeling that he was a guy who had to really work hard for it. It's just, but you're hearing all of the influences in him, it was funny because he used to laugh, like they kind of lumped him in with new wave and punk, and
which is insane, right? I mean, it's just absolutely insane. I mean, lump him in with like Chet Atkins and Chuck Berry, because that's where he comes from. So.
But then I remember taking even more liking to him when the video for let's see, was it The Waiting? He's talking about when he broke his hand.
Yeah. That was
Is it off
That was
Pack
later.
Up
That was the
Temptation?
bin. Well, because he broke his hand during Southern Accents.
Southern Accent. So it would have been, it was a video that was played on MTV. And I know because he's telling the story
Okay,
and,
I'm trying to
he's,
remember what that would be. Yeah.
we could think of it. We could look it up and see if we could track it down online. And he's like, I think in the show, maybe he had it was during the tour, I think maybe, but he's like, so, he's like, I punched the wall and he goes, I went to the doctor and the doctor's, and he does the impressions like, well, son, looks like you can't, you're not going to be able to play the guitar anymore, son. And then Petty, they bleep it up. He's like, I said, fuck that, on the
Yeah,
call.
yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's
Right. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
absolutely. But that's interesting too, because you were talking about Southern Accents there being an album that you latched onto, but that was kind of the most tumultuous, nightmarish time in Tom's life creatively, right?
Looking back, had no idea. Yeah.
No, and you got Dave Stewart comes in and he changes the game and he's wearing this bloody rhinestone suit and they're doing all this and there's a lot of cocaine around and there's people coming in and out and they're trying to produce it themselves and it's just this big mess. But I think, as with everything, and I'm sure, like you've talked to so many rock journalists, I was going to ask you about this for you on the Booked on Rock podcast. I think there's a through line with the truly great songwriters is that even if they do get off track, they tend to there's an equilibrium there that tends to bring them back, or they go completely off the rails and end up frigging dying. But a lot of those guys, but they'll come back because truly great songwriters, I think those songs are just in there and they will out eventually, right? As long as you got the right environments and the right circumstances.
I think he did it within this album because there are moments on there where it's like, whoa, where's he going with this? Make it better.
Yeah.
I interviewed, it was a great interview. I did a 33 and a third series I did on this album. And just how
Michael Washburn, you had
him on. You're the one who helped set that up. And Michael, wrote an amazing book, and he, from the aspect of the Southern culture and the Confederate flag and how things changed since then, and that made me listen to it a whole different light. But I also didn't realize just how fucked up things were within the world of Tom Petty at the time, and now that I listen to the album, I still love it, but I get it. I get the inconsistency there. And it's kind of like, where are we going here? Because now that Petty had kind of different ideas, things he wanted to do with it, but it 100%. Never really panned out. And, but I got to Dogs on the Run. I mean, like,
I love that song.
That's autumn from, I don't know what autumn in New England, man. The leaves start changing. I'm popping in, I'm listening to Southern Accents and I go, that song is, I don't know. I just love it.
Well, just that line in it, and it's funny how people gather around people living life without a net. That is just that's sort of Dylan level. You don't get better writing than that,
Well, we talked about that too, how he can capture so much emotion in such a concise amount of words.
Yeah,
nobody was better at it than him. There's the line, the lyrics to this song. Oh my God, we come with what was on our backs. When leaves had died and all turned black, back when the wind was cold and blew them round, when we laid our blankets on the ground. Now you can see where I could get that fall, the
100%,
autumn,
100%.
that chill in the air.
Yeah.
There's another one on here though. Let's see. I gotta find.
It's funny, while you're finding that, he does the opposite thing with something like Love Is a Long Road, which just sounds like the Pacific Coast Highway, right? So he's very good at painting those pictures for you that you can just you feel a place or a time or both. And like you said, there's not many people who are better than that, if any, than Tom Petty.
And here it is. The room was painted blue and gray. All my meals were served on a silver tray. I mean, I don't know what he's talking about. It just paints an image to me. Blue and gray. I love those colors together.
Yeah. And you just see, that's something that I've picked up on, and diving into Petty's music of this podcast, because it wasn't a big, huge, massive fan when I started the pub, which is just weird, right?
Yeah.
But his use of very specific imagery like that, and he does it the same thing in a song called Big Weekend from Highway Companion.
Yes.
They live in a brick house painted red and brown. So he throws a detail in there that you think he's got that image. He's got a very specific image in his mind, but he doesn't really prescribe anything from it. He just throws it out there and lets you pick it up and then apply it to whatever you think, right?
Leaves you guessing.
Yeah.
And some people like to tease Sammy Sammy Hagar, his lyrics, because he's not leaving anybody guessing, and
Yeah.
there's something to be said about that. There are times that Sammy has his moments lyrically, but in defense of Sammy and every other musician out there, that ain't easy what Tom Petty was doing.
Well, no, and that's the thing. You can't compare. If you're a songwriter and you're trying to compare yourself to Dylan, Petty, McCartney, you're on a hand into nothing because these guys are the top of the game. Like that's why they're in the Hall of Fame. That's why they've sold billions of records. It's why songs just pour out of them. It's because they're so natural at it and they're brilliant at it.
You know, it was so cool when I did an episode on Bob Dylan and the author. Apologies, I got to get his name. I want to make sure I get it correct. He was alluding to the fact that Bob Dylan would get to the point where he had mastered it's the lyrical art of Bob Dylan. And Michael Gray is like the Dylan expert. And he had gotten to the point where he had mastered the art of lyrics, where he was literally just playing around with it.
Yeah.
Like he said, literally he would in one verse put as many syllables and words as he could. And then in the next verse, you're waiting for him to do the same, and he would like space it out. It was just fucking around, like toying with it. I mean, he was that, and then you're talking that was like probably like you get to the late 70s, and he's just messing around with stuff like, let's try this, let's try that, as a lyricist, which is so cool.
And that's why one of the reasons I love Dylan, and I know that people rag on him for his voice. I kind of like Dylan's voice actually. I think it suits him, it suits his songs.
Yep.
But as a lyricist, there's essentially, I don't think there's a type of song that Bob Dylan can't write. And I think that Petty's one of the few people who's in that same bracket. Because when you go through, and again, Petty's catalog, he's written love songs, he's written ballads, he's written from character, he's written angry screeds against different people, he's written, sort of very generic, he's done everything. And he can turn his hand to all of it. And you were talking about with Full Moon Fever, you get this sort of polished, it's very sort of, Jeff Lynne comes in, and Jeff Lynne's God, right? In terms of creating radio friendly rock. There's just no one better ever. Yeah. So he comes in and helps with that. But I've sort of put this for, and I'll throw this out and see what you think about this. I think that it's Into the Great Wide Open, the next album. That's when the switch happens for me. It's not Full Moon Fever, because Full Moon Fever, I always think of, it's almost like the bachelor party before you get married. It's your last hurrah. This is just a bit of fun. I'm just going to go have fun. Turns out it ends up being this brilliant record, but I'm just having fun with Jeff Lynne, Mike Campbell, and we're going to record this in a garage. We're just going to have fun doing it. And then Into the Great Wide Open, he takes all that he's learned. He brings Jeff with him, right? And Jeff Lynne comes and produces and plays on that album as well. He brings it to Heartbreakers. But from that point on, from Into the Great Wide Open through to the end of Tom's career, he had hits and he wrote songs that were, quote unquote, radio friendly and hit friendly. But I don't think at any point from that point forward, he was ever writing for anyone other than himself.
Yeah.
He was only writing. I
agree.
There was a purity to that I think Jeff Lynne and that period, the Wilburys and Full Moon Fever, just unlocked. And he thought, okay, I don't need to worry about impressing the record company.
Yeah.
I need to sell records, but I don't need to worry about that. All I'm going to do is write the best song I can write every single time I sit down.
Had no issues with writing a song called The Last DJ.
Yeah.
He basically, he's playing career suicide. Some would have thought, like, you're gonna criticize the radio, who's
on a major label,
who's, and I say this sarcastically, who's been there for you all these years. It's like, excuse me, I've been there for you, radio, with my 8,000 hit singles. But he just was like, I think that was the turning point. Like, I'll just be an artist now. Yeah. Didn't need the money, didn't need the fame. I think he experienced all of that. And I think you're right. That's a good point. Boy, I tell you, Into the Great Wide Open, man. Learning to Fly. And I gotta say, the Goosebumps, the live version of Learning to Fly on that box set, where it's just him and the audience.
Incredible.
Oh my God.
Absolutely incredible. I'm not a, I don't like using the word spiritual always, because you get a connotation of that. But that's what spirituality is to me. That connection that you get to that song when you listen to him sing it that way.
Wow.
Especially the performance in Gainesville on Running Down a Dream. It's something else there, right? That's just
wow, man.
Incredible.
Absolute goosebumps. So now, what do you think of? You talk about some of the Petty albums that the much maligned Petty albums, right? Like Let Me Up, I've Had Enough. Jamming Me, All Mixed Up, Think About Me. Yeah,
it's Tom didn't want to do the Southern accents thing again. It was a gong show. What he wanted to do was get back to the basics of being a band, right? And so he said, okay, well, let's go in the studio and try and write as much in the studio as a band. And so literally some of those songs, you can actually hear it even. Tom counts in and just starts playing, and the band just has to follow him. And that's how good the hard records were that they
What's
cut,
the one?
right?
Whoa. Whoa. That's Runaway Trains, right? No, is that Runaway
No,
Trains?
no.
He's just messing around in the studio. Oh, that's all mixed up. Because then it goes mixed up. All mixed up is great, and Runaway Trains, man. Runaway Trains is great.
But Runaway Trains though is that reaction to turning down Boys of Summer, right? Because Micah come with Boys of Summer, and Runaway Trains is sort of sonically in roughly the same space. And I think Runaway Trains is a great song. I love that song, even though it does sound a bit dated with the synths. But yeah, let me up that. I think it's that palate cleanser. It's like, okay, let's just go and get back to basics. And it suffers a bit from not having an external producer to my ear. Like I always think that there are some bands like Prince can produce his own music, Jeff Lynne can produce his own music, you know, Eddie Van Halen can't produce his own music, as we learned. Some people need that. They need that check and balance person, right? And I think that that's where Let Me Up. To me, that's where its weakness is that it doesn't have that cohesion that a real producer would have probably brought.
And in his defense, how would he have known Joe Piscopo would not be cool in like 2 years later, right? You're jamming me. Take back Joe Piscopo. And now people listen to like, who's Joe Piscopo?
Yeah. Oh, dude,
I love Joe Piscopo. He was so fucking funny. I love.
Got to go listen to that episode I did with Armin Anderson, because we talked about, because it's not just Joe Piscopo, it's the duality of Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo. Those are not equal status comedians. They are just not in the same conversation.
And Piscopo, I remember when he was hot, I got his album, his comedy album,
right?
And you know, he was the man at that time, you know. But now it's like, who's Joe Piscopo?
Well, I had to look him up when I heard that song. I don't know who this guy is. He's got a funny name.
He did the best David Letterman. I don't know, is his comedy album even out there anymore to be bought? Because if you if you can listen to it, it's got to be on YouTube. It's gotta be. But what Joe Piscopo was the dude who was like so funny, so talented, but then he decided to get jacked and he became a bodybuilder, and it was just like he was no longer funny because he was like in such great shape that you couldn't laugh at him anymore. It'd be like Chris Farley getting jacked.
Yeah.
And but he's in Johnny Dangerously with
okay. I mean, I definitely subscribe to the school of thought that a comedian should never be film star good looking.
Right.
Right, they should be one of us. They shouldn't be, you know. I want to laugh with you, and it's really hard when you're beautiful. I don't want to do that. I'm
gonna tell you, man. He did a killer Sinatra. I mean, he was in Johnny Dangerously with Michael Keaton, which was very he was, and then he just dropped off the face of the earth. So yeah, Tom Petty mentioning him is kind of
Well, I love that too, because you know Eddie Murphy got pissed off, right? So you know, fuck Tom Petty. Like,
he got offended, yeah.
But Tom Petty said, "Dude, no, Dylan wrote the lyrics for that. I just kind of went with it because what are you going to tell him? Say to Bob Dylan, no." You know, so.
Hey, it got Eddie Money a little bit of press. Not that he needed it in those days. I mean, he was plenty famous, but yeah, Joe Piscopo. That's so wild. Yeah, man, Tom Petty, man, what a permanent part of my life. When he died, I just still can't believe he's gone. It is
one of those.
He was the guy that just seemed like he would be around for, like, he'd be like right now. Bob Dylan's like 80 and still going. I mean, there was no reason for him to stop, and he was still exploring musically. Mojo, for me, is my favorite Petty album of the latter part of his career.
Yep,
and
it's a phenomenal album. I mean, that
it is.
Again, we talk about, you know, artists, you know, they get called legacy acts, right? So once you get past that point of you're not, you know, quote unquote cool anymore, you're not appealing to that sort of, you know, 25-year-old demographic. So the radio's not going to be picking you up and pushing you as much. So it's easy to go into greatest hits mode then, right? And, you know, you look at a band like Kiss, or even to an extent Springsteen, a bit of a lesser extent with Springsteen maybe. But you get that thing, it's okay, well, we can sort of just go out and play the gigs, and that's great. We go out there, we have fun, we can keep the train rolling, we can keep everyone paid, you know, the roadies all get their paycheck, everything else, and everyone will love it. But Petty didn't do that. He went out and made a fucking blues record for no reason. And
Mike Campbell, I remember I had just gone back to radio just to do weekends, and I was just so hungry to go back and learn about all these artists again, because I had stepped away from them for a while. And I remember reading an article with Mike Campbell saying he's looking to get the Peter Green Fleetwood Mac tone. I was like, oh, that's so
Yeah.
fucking cool. And you hear it, you know.
Yeah, well, it's that Les Paul because he bought that new
Right.
that Les Paul, and I think that Les
Sunburst.
Paul is basically what he plays on pretty much every track on that album. You know, which is, and again, recorded live in the clubhouse. So they just
Yep.
fix up their practice space and bring all the equipment in. They record it live off the floor with Ryan Ulyate. Like, it's such a cool thing to do. And then, like you said, I mean, again, they do it with
First
Hypnotic Eye.
flash of freedom. Woo.
Superb. I mean, everything off that record is, for me,
Yeah.
is gold, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Don't pull me over. Just looking through this. Yeah. And then his final album, was it Hypnotic Eye was 2014.
2014, yeah.
You know, and Fault Lines is the one. You're the one that I think loves Fault Lines,
I
right? That
adore that song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now here's another fun discussion, is because we haven't talked about Wildflowers all that much, and Wildflowers is interesting because there were all those songs that I loved off of it when it came out, and then going back again years later to listen to it, and there are songs that all of a sudden, and that remind me. I want to talk about Echo too. There's a couple of great songs on there,
You bet.
but there are songs on Wildflowers that for whatever reason didn't get me the first time around, or maybe I know why, because, you know, once I got into to middle age, and I think it's Only Broken Heart is the one about, he's moving on, like he's reaching the next phase of his life. I believe it's that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all I can do to keep that little girl smiling. There's all that kind of all that imagery in there.
Don't Fade on Me was another one. Didn't hit me at first. Now To Find a Friend. Crawling Back to You was that.
Yeah.
That's the one. You know, I listened to it within the last few years. I'm like, why didn't I like this?
Yeah.
Like, why did I skip over that? I'm trying to figure out why I did that. But that's the thing. As you get older, you always, anybody listening right now should just go back to your record collection. If you haven't listened to something in a while, listen to it again and see if you hear something.
100%. I couldn't agree with that more. And I've talked to lots of people this season for Wildflowers about this, that it is a middle-aged album.
Yep.
And you don't connect. I mean, you can sonically, you're going to bop your head to Honeybee and Cabin Down Below and You Wreck Me. You're going to love all that. You're going to love Wildflowers because it's this bright, beautiful
You don't know
thing.
how it feels. Yeah.
But you're not going to connect with it the same way, right?
Well, and because I was 22 when it came out. So it's a whole different day. How about Time to Move On? Because that's one of my favorite Petty songs. Interesting in that it kind of, I'm glad they included in there, because it is kind of different from everything else with a synth.
It's got, it's got that pad in there. I mean, I've talked about this with different guests, that the thing that I find mad about Wildflowers is it's a really, really eclectic set of songs.
15 tracks.
15 tracks, lots of different looks, lots of different tempos, rhythms, topics, all this kind of stuff. And yet it's still cohesive.
Yeah, it is.
Still dovetail, and that shouldn't be possible, but it is. And it works really, really well.
What do you think of when they put out All the Rest, right? That was because it was supposed to be a double album.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay, well, just go down that track list, right? I mean, the 10 songs that didn't make the album: California, Something Could Happen, Somewhere Under Heaven, Climb That Hill, Hope You Never Hung Up Overdue. There's songs that didn't get included and we didn't get until later. Okay, some of them ended up on She's the One. There's some songs that got from this period. But
and which one of these songs was released as a single by Rod Stewart?
Leave Virginia Alone.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah.
I remember seeing that on a VH1, the Rod Stewart version. I'm like, oh, that's a cool tune. And then I read somewhere that Tom Petty wrote it. Yeah.
Well, that happens time and time again too, because the more you dig into Petty, the more you realize that not only, because when you look through the sort of the tour list, you think they weren't like, Van Halen, AC/DC, Aerosmith. They've not got like 2,500 gigs when they had the same sort of length of time. They probably could have racked up that many miles. But during that off time, they were also, the house band for Johnny Cash. They also went on tour. They were Bob Dylan's band. They also wrote for Don Henley and produced his albums. They did, Howie Epstein did John Prine's album. So they were also working musicians. And I think that's where some of that longevity comes from, in my opinion, is that you don't get stayed and sort of stuck in a rut when you go and working with other people and thinking, hey, that's kind of cool. For our next record, maybe I'll try something similar to that, or I'll bring in this specific part of it. So I think that kind of work ethic and generalist approach to music, played right into their hands.
and they're on the same label too. I forgot, Warner Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
That also comes into play too. So
Yeah, they
label
really
mates, as they call them. But yeah, Echo. Oh my God, dude, Room at the Top and Swinging. Those two. Lyrically swinging, like how clever, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That, and I gotta say now, the one album that I don't know, I kind of stepped away a little bit from TP, and I'm ashamed to say I need to listen to Highway Companion more, because I really kind of checked out at that time. And I was like, I don't know why I was checking. I was like, what, 2006? I don't know why. I can't explain to you why. I think maybe The Last DJ, I was a little disappointed in that. I wasn't feeling the fire on that.
Okay.
So I thought maybe TP's just kind of, maybe it's time for him to, his best stuff is behind him, which I was proven wrong with Mojo, but Highway Companion, I really need to listen to more. Now there is one song on there.
You'd know Saving Grace for sure. You'll definitely.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. No, yeah, definitely. And Jack is a great one.
Yeah. Turn This Car Around, Big Weekend, Damaged by Love, The Golden. I mean, it's a really good album, man.
Yeah, I will give it a listen. I almost feel bad. I feel guilty. It's like, well, wow. Why did I give up on TP? I don't know.
Well, that happens. I mean, it's the same thing with, I mean, I didn't listen to She's the One, even when I was doing my deep dive, when I started getting back into Petty in 2014, because I just thought, well, it's a movie soundtrack. So it's just going to be
right.
Some random songs and then a bunch of instrumentals. I didn't really give it any space or time at all. And then you go back and you discover Angel Dream, and you go back and you discover Walls, one of the best fucking lyrics he ever wrote. And then you go back and listen to all these. It's like, oh yeah, no, I shouldn't dismiss any of these albums. So.
Mudcrutch, I need to invest more time into Mudcrutch too.
Well, yeah, you talk about taking chances.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Apart from being, in the Heartbreakers and still being able to pack out arenas and, small sort of amphitheater venues, I think I'll just reform my first band. I'll play bass. I won't write all the songs. I won't sing all the songs, and I'll go on tour. Like, who the hell does that?
So cool. Well, but that goes back to what you're saying. I think he was at that point where he's just like, hey, let's just have fun.
Yeah.
Well, so pisses me off, man. He was only 65. He had so much more. He's
67, yeah.
Was he 67?
Yeah, he was born in 50. Yeah.
A lot left in the tank, man.
Well, it's good. You'd be the guy who asked this, because you've got, for my listeners, your knowledge of rock and roll, I would use the word encyclopedic. It's insane. Whenever we're having conversations on the Van Halen show, and someone will bring up a band, and you'll just start ripping out these, the albums and the band.
And I'm still learning every week. So whenever I have these guests on, I read the book.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, now I just learned a whole shitload on this band. Like I just read a whole book on.
But you retain it and you can recall it as well, though, right? So that's the difference, and a lot of people can't. So.
But a new podcast friend of mine, Tim Derling, wrote a phenomenal book on Kansas. So I was like, God damn, I didn't know all this about Kansas.
Yeah,
that's great. Anyway, sorry.
And the story's always interesting. I want to talk to you about
stories. Yeah,
Booked on Rock, but I was going to ask you, because I can't think of another artist who's ever done that. We get supergroups now and again, right? I mean, Audio Slave, you got as a supergroup. There's, the Highwaymen, and of course the Wilburys and all this kind of stuff. But I don't know there's ever been an act at the level of Petty who's won Grammys, platinum records, that kind of level of sort of success, who's gone back and done that and just started an old band or refired up an old band. I can't think of anyone doing that, but also having some success with it.
Not with an old band. I would say the closest I could think of is Springsteen, because he did that. He did that multiple times. I mean, after Born in the USA, Tunnel of Love he got rid of most of his E Street bandmates, made Tunnel of Love, but that was still a huge hit. Right. Then he forms a whole new band for Lucky Town and Human Touch in '91. Whole new. He just wanted to distance himself from that because it freaked him out, that kind of level of fame. Then he did the Ghost of Tom Joad in the mid '90s. He had every opportunity to form the E Street Band again. He didn't. So it's similar there. Yeah. Because he went. I remember the Ghost of Tom Joad mid '90s. He was just playing little venues, and just him and his acoustic guitar, and so that's the closest. But I would think we're probably not thinking of somebody, but you're right. I mean, which was cool for him to do that for his Mudcrutch bandmates too.
Yeah, no kidding, hey.
because a few of those guys were probably, you know, I mean, let's face it, a few of those guys, who knows, maybe not, but hey, suddenly now they're making some cash, and they're playing in front of big crowds, and they're loving it. And that's good on Petty, you know, to do that. So
Well, it's that love of music that is the one thing that I sort of take away, I think, almost more than anything else with Petty and Mike Campbell and Ben Mont and the Heartbreakers. It's just that genuine love of playing. They're not doing it for I mean, okay, there's the trappings of success, and that's always nice, but had they not ever got a record contract, Tom Petty would still have been writing songs, playing gigs, collaborating, writing for that all that stuff is gonna come out. Well,
he would have been playing in the local bar every weekend,
100%, or teaching guitar or something,
teaching,
right?
Whatever.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your podcast, Eric.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
Well, like I said, I discovered today and doing my research that you actually had a podcast called Discovery with Eric Senich.
Yeah.
That was 2019. So you weren't even a bored COVID lockdown, middle-aged white guy starting a podcast. You kind of got ahead of that bubble, right? So.
Right. Yeah. I when I discovered podcasts, it probably was around 2018 when I got I have the Samsung Galaxy, and they had the Podcast Addict app.
Right.
And I just, to me, when I was hearing was what radio wasn't anymore, and really was at one time, like back in the old Tom Donahue days of FM radio, when it just started out in the late 60s, early 70s, was like an art form.
Yeah. And
that's what I was hearing. And it was like a blank canvas to do whatever you wanted. And at that time I was, within the restricted world of FM radio, where you had to be careful how much you say. You have a time limit.
Yeah.
Playlist, all that. But I hadn't the slightest clue as to how I was going to do it. And I didn't even decide to do it. I just remembered I had the same feeling of like when I listened to a rock DJ when I was a kid wanting to be on the radio. I was like, I'd love to do that. And I knew how much I really wanted to do it, because I knew that there were more people listening to me on a 50,000 watt radio station than on a podcast, especially when you first start out. You might have a handful of listeners, and I didn't care. Going back to like, just these guys just want to make music.
Yeah.
It didn't matter to me. I didn't give a shit. It was an art form. I needed that creative release, and I just needed to find out how I was going to do it. And so then I started. It's funny, I don't even remember how I started. I just I remember just playing around with, I think I had an old microphone somebody gave me, and I somehow made it work, and what didn't sound great and everything. But I was like, I knew once I started, there was no turning back, And so then I was just Google articles, YouTube videos. How do you do that? How do you set up the equipment? What's the best equipment to get? And little by little, I did it. And I had a computer that was good enough, strong enough. And when I was in radio, and I still use it. Sony has a great software, Sony Vegas, and it's limitless tracks, and right. You can move all the parts around. You can do all this stuff with it. And so I knew I had, I produced commercials, and I produced a bunch of stuff in radio. So I knew I had the skills to do that. I was like, let's put that to use. And Discovery just came up, like vinyl disc.
Yeah.
Discover all these bands and artists. And I would go, and I just decided to pick an album, a random album, whatever. And then I'd take clips of the songs, and then I would read a shitload of articles and type up the script, and then read the script, produce it, put the music underneath it, sound effects, clips from interviews from that person, whatever. My personal favorite one is I did one on the Manson, the Mansoners, the whole thing with the Beatles and all that, and I put this dark music underneath it. And I had so much fun doing it. And when I did my first episode, it was on Def Leppard. I just figured, fuck it. And I did Def Leppard. And when I played it back in my car, in radio, I had done voice tracking, which is pre-recording your shift. And I had that surreal thing of like hearing my voice in the car, my own voice being a DJ, that was kind of a trip. But hearing the podcast episode completed and done, I was like, I fucking did it, I did it. And then from there, it was just honing the craft and getting better and better at it. And then along the way, I would be interested in maybe getting some authors on to talk about their books. And so I would do that. And and I kept doing that. But then after a while, some of my episodes were getting pulled for copyright claims because I was playing copyright music, and
Yeah.
there's fair use is a defense. It's not going to block anybody from suing you or pulling your stuff down. And as you know, with I use Spreaker. Which one do you use to distribute your
Acast.
episode? Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think they all have that thing. You have to agree to the terms.
Yeah.
And it says it right in there. So I knew it said you should not be playing copyright material. And I just ignored it. And because I wasn't monetizing it, I wasn't getting paid.
Yep.
I wasn't running ads. So I thought, well, I was justifying it. It still doesn't matter. You're using somebody's copyright material without their permission. So they started getting pulled down. Now, I could have just kept going with it or whatever, but the fact that, and I'm not no kidding, Kevin, I would take for each episode. I'll send you some of the episodes. You'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
They would take. I counted out the hours on average, 15 hours per episode. Okay, that's around a full-time job.
Yep.
That's around life.
Of course.
So I literally was spending countless hours when I got home from work on the weekends. And then when the episode was done, or so I thought, I would listen back to it and I would timestamp. Nope, got to fix that. Nope, that's a little too high. The volume's too high there. Nope, I faded it down. Oh no, this is going to sound better. I think I should reread that part. I don't like how I sound.
Yeah.
Perfectionist. And I 15 hours. I'm like, if I'm going to spend 15 hours on an episode and having only to get pulled, I think it's time for me to kind of make a pivot. And I did. And so I just thought to myself, how can I come up with compelling content without playing copyright material? And then it occurred to me, like, when you're reading a great book about a great rock and roll band or artist, there's no music there. You're just reading it. It's stories.
Yeah.
You're loving the stories. And that's when I said, well, let's give it a shot. And I didn't really think about all the components that are involved in it. In other words, like, I book all the interviews. I got to schedule the interviews.
It's a lot of work.
So I got to go back and forth and say, how about Tuesday night? It's at 7:30. Yeah, can we do 6:45?
Yeah.
I'm not available that week. And you're booking all the interviews. Then, by the way, you got to read the book. At least I will, I half the reason I wanted to do the Book Down Rock podcast is to give back and help these authors who work their asses off on these books get the word out and promote them. So I read through the book, I'll set up questions, then you do the interview, then you edit the interview. And then over time, I was like, I really should put this up on YouTube because I get a bigger audience.
Yeah.
Then I got to pay for the software to produce the videos. I use Veed, VEED is the,
right.
And then, social media. Then I got to go promote, right? and then I'm like, well, you know what? I should also take the full episode and maybe take a little highlight video. Now I'm going to produce that.
Yeah.
Oh, there's shorts. Shorts are good because like with social media, it's so valuable to promote, especially when you don't have money to. It's not like I can pay for a billboard. So that's where that stuff really works. So it's very time consuming, but I love it. But that's Book Down Rock kind of sprung out of the fact that Discovery I was running into these legal issues and I work in the court system here in Connecticut and I have connections and I talked with a copyright attorney and he's just like, it's not even worth. Yeah. But what if I just play 10-second clip? That's a fallacy.
Yeah. But
you will hear podcasts that do play music. And if you get away with it, you get away with it. But if you hit the radar, like I was trending on Spotify and it's starting to blow up. So that was an issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but you don't play petty stuff for that reason, I'm assuming.
That was why I started not playing it. It's because exactly this. I had a conversation with a guy named Pete Nestor, who is another great podcast, the Honest and Unmerciful Record Review podcast. And what they did is they went the Spotify route where 2, 3, 4 years ago, they've stopped it now, but you used to be able to include music legally if you exclusively publish your podcast through Spotify because they had the license to do it or some way or other. But he was saying, like, because they looked into it and he said, yeah, the fair use thing Yeah, it's not really a thing. People think it is, but it just depends on who the other person is, right? With the band or the NC. Eagles, you'll get taken down in
Forget it.
seconds. Beatles, you'll get taken down in fucking
Beatles were the
seconds,
ones that
which
got
is
pulled
insane.
down. Yeah,
Yeah, it's insane.
My Beatles ones got pulled down
Yeah.
first.
But our Queen podcast, we don't publish on YouTube, so I think that kind of flies us under the radar a wee bit. But Queen podcast, we use that. I know the Van Halen boys use it, so I think it's
And
some
they do,
bands and some bands and entities.
You would think Van
recognize it
Halen
as
too,
well.
because the Van Halen
Yeah, the
camp
machine.
there is pretty tight. So
Yeah.
I just don't think it's cool with them. I think it really Alex is the one who would, if he wanted to do something, he could do something. Look, that's the thing. I mean, you want to do it, because what'll happen is it's not like you're going to get like slammed with a lawsuit. They're
They'll
just going
take
to
it
make
down.
it clear. They're going to take it down, or they're going to do a copyright, or they're going to do like a cease and desist. Do you really want to hire an attorney for thousands and thousands of dollars with no guarantee that a judge is going to say you can do it? Hopefully the laws change one day, because it does certainly add color to the episodes, but that's the challenge in it. It's like that's kind of like I'm wearing a Jaws shirt right now. It's like the shark's not working. How can we make this work? How can we make this compelling? How are we going to keep people's interest? So
don't show it. Just don't show it.
And it turns out these guys have all these amazing stories. So
yeah,
you really can't go wrong on it. People really enjoy it. And I have to just space out the interviews. Like this past weekend, I read and set up questions for 3 books: Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday.
Wow.
So
yeah, because you don't release on a just a purely weekly schedule. Like sometimes we're getting 2 episodes a week, and because I was going to ask you about that. So
which I should technically probably, being a radio guy, people want to have that. They know when it's coming. I get that, but it's hard with scheduling. It's like, I schedule 100%. It when I can, and I get it up when I can. So.
But I was going to ask you, so when you transition, because I love talking to people. I'm a sort of a affable guy, I think, and I enjoy doing interviews, and I enjoy talking to people. Love talking to people about music.
Great.
That's all I fucking do, right? But there is a difference in the skill set that you need to write and narrate an episode and compose it and put it together and bring in the different elements, and then actually conduct an interview where, because I'm sure you've done it, where you go in for an interview and you think, well, I want to hit this point, this point, this point, and it becomes clear pretty quickly, like, oh, this person wants to talk about this.
Right.
So getting that discipline to sort of manage to find your way back to the things you want to talk about eventually, or have that sort of shape to still making it a show. Was that an easy transition for you from going from sort of the scripted to the conversation?
It wasn't that easy, because I had done interviews and working in radio. So I knew how to, and I went to school for journalism. I was a sports writer, and I interviewed people. So but it still is. I feel like I can get better at it, because it's like a rhythm and a flow to it. And especially when it's a brand new guest, it takes a little while to get into the rhythm and get a feel for their personality. So I mean, I'll have questions ready to go, and then sometimes I just go straight off. I go, forget it, throw the page out, and just let's have fun. Or other times, I'll try to pull them back on track and say, okay, let's stick to what we have. But that's even rare, because it's the guest is like I want the guest to feel like they can just have fun and say whatever they want. But I do have my questions, and there was a time period there where I was even trying to limit it to like each episode was to be an hour, but I just said, screw that. I just usually set up about 15 questions. That's always a good number. And I'm always cold in the start. I feel like by the end of the episode, I'm sound much better than the beginning. If it's a new guest, I get into a rhythm. I start to warm up, and, but it's a skill interviewing, because you have to shut your yap. You can't interrupt them. You gotta, just as it is a skill to be an interviewee, like this shit. Now I'm comfortable being a guest. I was never being interviewed. I was interviewing others. And then when people wanted me to come on to talk about Van Halen through the Van Halen News Desk thing, and in the beginning, I was like, I didn't feel comfortable. It's weird. It's like you're not behind the driver's wheel,
Yeah.
So, but as an interviewer, I try to watch all the guys that I always enjoyed watching how they did their interviews. But then it's just easy for me, because it's a natural curiosity. I mean, I just genuinely want to know. I just genuinely want to know about this shit.
And that comes across
fascinated.
too. You're just talking. Sorry,
Hopefully,
just talking about
hopefully.
interrupting.
Son of a bitch. No, hopefully it does come across because and the ones I love maybe even more so are like the bands that maybe a band I don't even know. A lot of these books, it's like I've never heard of this band, and I could easily be like, nah, I don't know who they are because maybe the interview won't be that good because the guest is going to pick up on the fact that I don't know who it's about.
Yeah.
But it's actually the reverse. I want to know as much as I can about every single band that's ever existed. So, for example, like I just did one on the Gits, who were a band fronted by a female, Mia Zapata. This is an amazing story, Kevin. They were based out of Ohio, and then they moved over to Seattle in '89, not knowing that the scene was going to blow up there.
Okay.
They start to pick up some serious steam by the spring of 93. All of their friends and other bands are getting signed, Pearl Jam, Nirvana. They played on the same bill as Nirvana. They play, they were right there. Everybody in Seattle loved them. Atlantic Records had a meeting with them at a restaurant. They had a meal. They offered the band a deal. They were like a day or two away from signing, and the lead singer was murdered. Mia Zapata was murdered coming out of a club around midnight. She was walking.
My God.
Look it up. You can listen to the episode. Although the drummer wrote the book, the point of the book was to kind of bring the attention back to what an amazing musician she was. So it's not about the murders. There's plenty of stuff out there, but she was leaving a bar around midnight, and a complete stranger attacked her, raped her, killed her, left her on the middle of the street. And you talk to guys like Kurt Cobain, and in fact, after she was murdered, they wanted to raise money to hire a detective to find who did it. They did find, by the way, like 10 years later, they found out who the guy who did it. Kurt Cobain called up Steve Moriarty, is the drummer of the Gits. He's the one who wrote the book. Hey, Steve, it's Kurt. We want to help. How can we help? And they put together a concert, a fundraising concert. They were this close.
Wow.
He goes, man, we would have been on the radio everywhere. We were just, and if you listen to the music, it's on Spotify. They're good. And they were legit. They were legit.
Yeah, but
so I never would have known about this. Now, this is Feral House, the publisher. I should really applaud all of these friggin' publishers. Feral House is one of my favorite because they take on these great stories that are off the beaten path, maybe, or not necessarily mainstream, but just solid, fascinating stories. That
I think though that's where, again, your podcast, that's where it is so strong, is because you do care. And you are passionate about the story. Yeah. And I think probably that is partially journalism background, but partially also just your natural inquisitiveness, is that, when I hear a story like that, well, of course I want to listen to that episode now, right? Because the Guns N' Roses story, do I really want to hear, Duff's book, do I want to hear about all the excess and all the drugs and everything? It's okay, well, some of it will be interesting, but I'm not that bothered about that. I want to know about the creative side, or I want to know about, like you said, if this is about what a great creative genius is, but that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
If we've lost this real creative genius, that's interesting. Whereas the Motley Crue, biopics, I'm not going to watch that. I don't care about watching a bunch of guys shagging anything that moves. So.
And we're at a point now where it's story time. A lot of these bands, there's some of them are still going, but they have all the stories to tell, and they need to be told because this is going to create, hopefully in the future, some kid wants to learn more about these bands, and the books are there, and these episodes are there to find out more about them. The episodes are built really to help sell a book, but also you don't have to be an avid reader to enjoy it. That doesn't matter. And that's not, again, that's not to steer away people from buying the book. They end up selling copies, and I hear about it all the time, and I love it. I get people that just like, hey, I bought the book because I heard, but as a standalone episode, I wanted it to be something. I didn't want to scare people off and think they have to be like some book nerd. You just have to be a fan of rock and roll. Well, we'll go ahead and tell you the stories. If you want more of them, buy the book, but we're going to tell you some fun stories, and you're going to get something out of it regardless. But I used to have the original logo too, the original logo had pictures of books on the bottom. And I decided, let me just remove those. Let me just let me make it clear that you can be a reader. You cannot be a reader. It doesn't matter. You just have to be a fan of rock and roll, and you're welcome. And I think that's worked out, and the numbers just slowly rise to where, especially on YouTube, YouTube has such a huge audience that you could tap into. I mean, Christ, I did Liberty DeVito, Billy Joel's drummer. I mean, I got like one of his videos, like 90,000 views, and then other ones I'll get like 100 views,
Yeah.
But they're there and for people to enjoy. And I just love, you go on a car ride driving to and from work or whatever, or you're doing work around the house and you're just listening to great stories. And, my number one listener would be my mom.
Really?
She's 84. She's funny. She knows very little about these artists. So it's just funny to hear her make their comments. And
oh, that's so cool, man.
Yeah. She goes, I know Diana, my sister died. She goes, Diana liked Kansas. I know, it's so funny. She's a loyal listener, but yeah, it's cool. And then you meet people all over the world, like getting emails from people that listen. And then just like I don't even really have to go out and seek interviews. A lot of times they come to me because these publishers or publicists find out about me, or they listen to and enjoy, and they say, hey, we think you'll enjoy this guest. What do you think? Bring them on.
But it's also a credit to your professionalism, your ability to actually shape those interviews, all because
I hope
if it wasn't professionally produced, or if there was sort of, they knew you were just trying to gotcha their writer, then you're not going to get those guests right. But you never do that. You always, like you said, you do put the writer front and center. And of course, sometimes you got to do a little bit more work because some people aren't natural promoters or natural talkers. But you're comfortable to just sit back and say, okay, well, they're off telling their story. I'll just sit back and listen now.
There are challenges along the way. We've had, sometimes I've had ones that maybe they don't talk a whole lot, but they still, they're talking about something they have passion for. So before long, they're opening up.
Yeah.
I only had one issue with a guest, and it was when I had COVID, and I probably should have just rescheduled it. But I did read the book, and the questions I set up were based on the book, at least so I thought. But he got pissed. And I edited it out, and he just didn't think the questions were directly specific to the book. And I remember, and it was this awkward moment because I could sense something was up. And then I asked the question. He goes, I thought we were here to talk about the book. Like, he raised his voice at me, and I was like pissed. He was pissed.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, man, good seeing you. I did that. And he goes, oh, you don't want to ask any more questions? I'm like, no, I'm good. And then he emailed me. Yeah, he emailed me. He's like, hey, that was kind of an awkward ending there. And he didn't even apologize. He was just like, I just kind of felt like, the questions weren't, about the book. And I was like, thinking to myself, dude, half the reason I do this show is to help you, the author who worked your ass off on a great book, which I read, which I set up questions about. The cover of the book is on the episode art. The link to buy the book is in the, you know what I mean? Like, it was kind of like,
that is weird. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, it almost felt like, I remember I was trying to get the interview and it took a little while to finally make happen. It almost felt like he just didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
It was the only time but everybody else, they're some great people, man. James Campion is a great writer, and he's a fan of the show. And just, I'll have people joke to like, geez, I got to write a book just so I can be on,
Yeah.
So I love it. And there are some publishers who from the beginning, just, Sonic Bond out of the UK, bunch of great books. I've had so many of those authors on, and, and then whenever you have a book that's Van Halen related, it's like, it's amazing, because then I'll write an article, put it up on the Van Halen news desk, and then I'll embed the episode there. And it's like, whoa, like, that Van Halen news desk has a pretty big,
a big following. But let's talk about that real quickly, because we should say that the Van Halen news desk it's a website, it's on Twitter, it's on all the social medias, and this is the primary source of Van Halen news, and it is up to the freaking minute. Man, so how did you end up getting involved with that?
Yeah, vhnd.com. Yeah, I was working at the radio station in Connecticut doing weekends, and in this particular station, the owners were now having their disc jockeys, full-time disc jockeys, put up blogs and the program director asked me if I'd want to do it, even though I'm part-time. The part-timers could do it if they wanted to. I was like, oh man, yeah, because I hadn't written in so long and I missed writing. And so I wanted to write about, rock and roll again. So I did. I would write articles every week, and a few of them were on Van Halen. And my program director teased me. He goes, they can't all be about Van Halen. Don't worry. But I did a few. And then what I did was I'd take those articles and I'd put them up on the VH Links website. VH Links is it's a great fan forum place where all the fans can go. They've been there for many, many years. And I would just say, hey guys, here's an article I wrote. Check it out. Just to share it. And then one day I got a message from the publisher, Jeff Hausman. He asked if I'd be interested in writing for the website. And that was probably 2017, maybe 2018. I'm trying to remember. And it's been about 7 years now. I said, yeah, man, absolutely. So then I would just write an article or two here and there and contribute it to him, and he would put it up on the website. Over time, he's so busy because he runs the Van Halen store. He sells the merchandise,
right?
And that's a full-time job. Yeah. So he was looking for help, and eventually, he set me up with just getting into the WordPress they use, WordPress, and I just, that way I could really, really help out even more so. And I could just kind of, we subscribe to an email list that feeds us anything Van Halen related.
Yeah.
But we also go out and find what we can. And then if I had more time, to be honest with you, like if I didn't have a full-time job, I could even do more. I could do like really full feature articles and all that. But what I really can do at least is curate and keep things up to date. And if I see something that comes in, I could put it up. It takes a little while. You got to be careful with copyright photos. That's the other thing. Yeah. Copyright photos and all that stuff. So that became a regular thing to where it's what I do now, like pretty much daily. It's been kind of slow the last few weeks, but a lot of times, it's almost like nightly there's something to put up. And and then I have these outside connections like yourself, Darren Paltrowitz, who wrote the great book on Roth, the DLR book. Darren has his own podcast, the Paltrow Cast, and he's great. Every guest he has, he's going to ask about Van Halen. I love it. I love it. He's the best. So he'll sneak in a Roth or Van Halen question, and more often than not, he'll get a great response. And he'll email me and or text me, and he'll say, "Hey, this might be a good article idea. What do you think?" And then I listen to it. Yeah, man, let's do it. Yeah. So I put those up. Greg Prato, one of my favorite authors, wrote an amazing book on Blind Melon too, actually. And he's been on many times. And so he will sometimes do interviews, like he did interview with Michael Anthony. And so he'll feed me those stories and I put them up. And Greg, by the way, too, he writes for Ultimate Guitar, and he will take excerpts from my podcast now and write articles about it and cite as said on Booked on Rock with Eric Senich. So he's like,
that's super cool, man.
So supportive of the show. But so he feeds me our story ideas. But like what you guys did with the Van Halen 3 reimagined, you and Scott Monroe, that just a lot of times it's just like kind of an organic thing. Like there was no intent. I mean, this might interest people as to how that whole thing came about because it blew up. It was like all over the place. Yeah. I love it because they're saying Kevin Brown, Scott Monroe.
I'm like, what the is going on? We just did this for,
I figured I'd call you a music / podcaster. So everybody was calling you a musician / podcaster. But that was just like an, oh, by the way thing. Like you weren't looking for anything. You were just like, hey man, check it out. Here's what we did. We reimagined the songs off Van Halen 3 and we edited them down and we shortened them and clipped this and we did that. Yeah. And I was like, damn, this is an interesting story. This is pretty damn cool. And because
we just wanted you to listen to it. Just want to listen. The Pope's blessing on this.
And my radar came up like it's just you have that like radar that says no, this is something to work with here. And I just threw it to you guys like, hey, why'd you do it? Well, what are your thoughts on it? You gave me the quotes, and there, the next thing you know, we got a story. So I just put it up, and then Ultimate Classic Rock picked it up. Blabbermouth picked it up. I mean, Christ, I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. Radio stations, I'm sure, were talking about it somewhere, Yeah.
But it
you
got
know,
people,
around the
it got
country.
people talking about Van Halen album that everyone
It
had
got
forgotten
people
about.
talking
So it was
about
like,
it. Yeah.
that's killer.
Yes.
So it does show you that our
So
little indie podcasts do every now and again, you can make a small splash. And
I love it.
my biggest post was I'd sort of written this post for Mike Campbell's birthday on my Facebook. And, it's just one of those things you don't know whether it got shared and shared and shared. And soon after a week, it was like
Isn't that wild?
150,000.
Yeah.
What the? I didn't even, that was
Love
just a
it.
throwaway. I was sitting downstairs in the basement. I thought, well, I'll just do something nice for Mike's birthday. Who knows?
That's the
You don't know,
surreal
right?
thing. That's the surreal thing is like, I just did this in my basement.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like David Lee Roth, he goes to us to get the word out on shit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most amazing thing.
Mad.
I mean, he's got his own website. I mean, he's David Lee Roth.
Yes.
I mean, he could, I'm sure he's got people he can call at Ultimate Class Rock, or maybe he could reach out to somebody and they could,
Yeah.
but he does us a solid. And like today, he just let us know he's on vacation. So he just let us know. He says, he's travel bug has bit him again. He's planning some fun vacations throughout the rest of the year. It's time to live life right now, he says. So he'll probably be posting less content these days. Now, I mean,
So
that was,
funny.
and we got on the map when Sammy announced the tour and invited Dave, kind of, sorta.
Yeah.
And Dave sent us the quote, and he said, release this quote. And it was just very short and succinct, but it was like, what was it? Something like, let's go, I'm ready, or something, whatever.
Yeah.
That was like exclusive to us. It was like, this is so cool. But that's the funny thing, because that I remember driving home from my regular full-time job, and Jeff calls me and he's like, hey, he texted me first. He said, could you put up something? Dave gave us a quote. And I'm driving home from work, and I was stuck in a traffic jam, and I called Jeff. I'm like, dude, I'm stuck and I can't. I said, I could do it as soon as I get home. He's like, all right, we worked as a team. He's like, let me get it started. I'll get it rolling. When you come home, call me. And, we did it, and we're brainstorming, like, what do we want the headline to be? And we're doing all this, and I'm doing this from my apartment, and the next thing it's like, it's all over like mainstream rock media, which is, that's the world we're living in. It's a whole different world. I mean, I used to have to, just to be on the radio, I'd have to drive 40 miles, 50 miles to wherever just to get into a radio studio. Now I'm here in my apartment, so, and I'm admittedly, I could talk a lot, in podcasts. I love talking rock and roll, but I'm an introvert. I love hanging by myself. I almost got married, and that didn't happen. So I'm like just a gigolo, but I'm just hanging by myself. I'm very independent. I'm a low key, like, introvert dude. I go to my movies on the weekends. I hang with my mom. I just keep, I'm not, I've had to get up in front of crowds and introduce bands. Like, I introduced Collective Soul once. It was like 3,000 people and all that. And that's not easy for me.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to be behind the mic and do radio, but being in front of crowds, it's a whole different thing. So I love being home and be able to do this at home
and get that connection. But I think what that goes to, though, you're saying, though, like with VHND and Roth is releasing stuff through there, and I'm sure that the Van Halen machine has a keen eye on it as well, making sure that's another outlet.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why you sort of think, well, yeah, I get that it's your copyright, and I get all that. I understand that, and I'm fully supportive of people's, artists should be paid for the work. I'm fully on board with all that. But fan communities like the ones that we develop as independent podcasters, they add value to that brand, and they give fans a way of interacting with the music and with merchandise and all those kind of things that isn't there. Because the Van Halen machine can't do all that. The Tom Petty estate doesn't have the bandwidth to do all that kind of stuff. So when we do this as fans, I think it just adds value. So that's why it's always a bit like, oh, really? You don't want me to do this or that?
You're preaching to the choir. I know, man.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir. It's the same concept of like, why are the Grateful Dead still to this day huge? Why are there Grateful Dead fans who are high school age, 20s, 30s, 40s? That's because they allowed recording at their concerts and have no problem with that being shared.
Yeah.
The whole reason I'm a Grateful Dead fan, the reason I fucking love the Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia, is because one day my older brother Marty gave me a cassette tape with Grateful Dead, New Haven, Connecticut, May of 1977, and I was just blown away by what I was listening to. So now if if you had a situation where, Bob Weir and company were like, no, you're not fucking trading our shit. No.
Yeah.
Now I'm not a fan. Right now, I'm not a fan of Grateful Dead. I could tell you right now, I wouldn't have gone to the concerts that I've been to, and I wouldn't have bought their albums, and I wouldn't. So,
yeah,
it's weird. It's a weird thing that, this was like when I interviewed Christopher Thorne from Blind Melon. The whole reason he did the interview is because Greg Prado wrote the book on Blind Melon. He was the one. He was cool, man. He's like, hey, Chris, I got a friend. He's got a great podcast. Would you want to be on?
Yeah.
And he sent Chris an episode of Discovery, and the whole reason he did is because he loved how I produced it with all the songs, the Blind Melon songs, blah 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 blah. Sure enough, so I do an interview with him, and I insert the Blind Melon songs. I get pulled down for a copyright, and I was laughing.
The guy in the music is on.
Wait a minute, yeah, the guy who wrote the songs is telling me it's okay. You're telling me it's not okay.
Yeah, it's just madness.
I really think it's in their best interest to not do that, because I think YouTube has helped a lot of these bands, a lot of these legacy acts. Like if you go see, like a Kansas or a Night Ranger, bands who really that they could use that exposure, and I don't think they stop anybody from putting anything
for
up.
Sure. Beato talks about this all the time, right? The same thing. He gets someone at that level starts getting strikes, and he says no. And I think that's where. We, cycling back to what we were talking about earlier, that homogeneity of music, you need people teaching people how to appreciate music, or at least giving people a different way to think about it, so that we don't fall into that trap of, okay, well, that's good because it sounds like everything else. And I think that, what we do, and I'm, trying not know with no largesse, what we do is, I think, or certainly what I'm trying to do is bring a joy of music or a different approach or sort of a, perspective on it to an artist that I think people maybe take a little bit for granted.
Yeah.
And without that kind of community, you don't have that then, right?
Look, I would say, if I was an artist and I'm tuning into a podcast and I'm hearing the host say, and now, here, this is how Tom Petty wrote Free Fallin'. Now here's all of Free Fallin'. Then I'd be like, whoa, but you're just playing a little bit of it. So that means I need to really go out and purchase.
Absolutely.
Back in the day before Spotify, but at least I need to at least go to Spotify and press play and at least give them 0.0000001% of a penny. But it just, to me, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense, because now more than ever, you really want to keep these bands' names in the public spotlight. It's interesting. Like they're more classic rock songs get more exposure over the last 15, 20 years through movies.
Yeah.
It's amazing. All in the trailers, thankfully. Cause then, then there's always somebody's like, what is that? What's that? So,
well, CCR Chronicles is in the charts again. So
I was reading
the other day, it's like, what? I mean, of course, that collection of songs is insanely good, but you think,
did you
CCR,
hear about,
really?
Did you hear about Doug Clifford, the drummer? His son is accused of killing his girlfriend.
What?
My friend sent me the article.
Oh my God. That's mad.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out.
Right? I mean, it's like, okay. Yes. Where is it here? Let's see. Yeah. Rock legend's son charged with girlfriend's murder. The son of the drummer for the legendary band Creedence Clearwater Revival has been charged with the murder in Nevada. Wow, man.
Madness.
What's up with that? Yeah,
let's
picture him.
Let's wrap this first little bit.
By the way, real quick though, like just to piggyback off that, I would say fascinating listen for people regarding publishing. Episode 209. A big thanks to Darren Paltrowitz, who had this guy on his show, Randall Wixon, who's huge in the music publishing business in both in LA, and I think he's got also a one in is it in Canada? Let's see, I got it in the description here. Or no, UK. Yeah, London. And this dude, Tom Petty, wrote the foreword. He was buddies with Petty. He's okay. He give it a listen. He saved Tom Petty a ton of money that the record label was going to kind of rip off from him, and And
Cool.
since that day, and that was late 70s. And from that point on, Petty always went to Randall. Said, what do you think of this? What do you think of this?
Neat.
And he talks about all that stuff, like what goes into a song being approved for a commercial. What's the difference between hearing a song on a commercial by the actual artist, or sometimes you'll hear that song that's recognizable, but it's recorded by somebody else.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting shit about.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool beans, man.
And latest episode is on Kansas, but we got one on Yes's 90125. We got one on U2. Got one on the Faces. We got one on Toto, Y&T. A lot of good stuff, man. So Tim Durley, who wrote the Y&T book and the book on Kansas, he also had a book on collecting 8-tracks. And you talk about how a friend's neighbor was like throwing out a bunch of shit, and in there were these 8-tracks, and one of them was Van Halen 2. And, in the book, he's got the picture of like the actual 8-track. It's all like scratched up and shit. Yeah.
That's so good. Well, on one of the other episodes, I mean, I should say that, your episode brought me to the best music sort of biography that I've ever read by Greg Renoff.
Oh, God.
I think is just, like, I sort of messaged Greg and on the side and said, look, I've never read a book that made me homesick for a place I didn't grow up in.
Yes.
Which that book does, because it takes you to Pasadena and creates that place so vividly, and then drops you in with the band that you know and you love and tells the story. But the way he creates that environment that sort of explains why Van Halen who they are was absolutely remarkable. I think as a writer, he's just sensational.
And just super nice guy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like I've interviewed him, I think like 3 or 4 times maybe. But like when my dad passed, he'd sent me a text. Sorry to hear about your dad. I mean, it's just like, I've never met him in person. He has his connections to Connecticut. I want to say, is his wife originally from there? We were going to meet up a year or two ago, or right around COVID. It never happened. He was going to be in New Haven, but man, yeah. And then, we'll see what he's got next. Now, last we heard from him was that they were going to make a movie out of that book too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you talk about putting bands on the map with mainstream audiences. That's huge too. I mean, that's what it's all about. Is like, I just want people to know who Van Halen is. And I want to see that logo on shirts everywhere. I want to see, I want to see what Brian May and Roger Taylor do with Queen with Van Halen.
Yeah.
So that's hopefully, the news desk does what we can, to keep that alive. And like I said, if I could do more, I would. If I wasn't working during the day, man, I would probably, I'd be.
Oh, I'd be a full-time podcaster, man.
Shit. I remember talking to Jeff about we should do a Van Halen News Desk podcast and, all these great ideas, but you got to have time. You run out of time,
especially if you want to do them properly, which you do with your social.
And I'd like to write a book eventually,
on Van Halen.
Yeah, maybe Van Halen. Greg Prato was saying you should do one on the touring history of the band. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to write a book on podcasting. I'd like to write maybe even a book on collecting all the quotes I've gotten from these guests, or I don't know. Yeah. But that takes time too. But that I would love it. I'm a short distance writer. I was always a sports writer where I wrote articles. I still write articles. Long distance book is a whole different thing. But hey, maybe I'll get laid off from my maybe I'll be unemployed.
That could be a retirement hobby, right? That's be a midlife crisis.
Yes. So yeah, we'll see. But I'm not going anywhere. VHND is not going anywhere, and Booked on Rock's here to stay. And that's it, man. That's it.
Well, so where can people find Booked on Rock, and who have you got coming up?
Yeah, so bookedonrock.com is really the best place to go. You can get links to all of the listening platforms, but we're everywhere on Spotify, YouTube and all that. And it's available in both audio and video. So they're a little bit different. I mean, it's the content's the same, but the audio, I do a little different stuff when I, produce that. And then there's the whole thing in video. So if you want to, see my handsome face, you can, you could do that. So we're on YouTube at Booked on Rock. We're on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever the hell it's called, TikTok, Instagram. And I just hope to God there's no more of those because it's busy enough. I'm like, fuck. I make these little shorts and everything when I have time because you want to keep your stuff out there. But sometimes it's time consuming. So what do I have coming up? Yeah, I just had the Kansas one I told you about.
Yep.
Here's a cool one coming up very soon. Oh yeah, Iron Maiden, baby. Iron Maiden. Now this is a reissue, updated edition of Iron Maiden album by album, which I can't recall which year it came out initially, but it's updated, goes right up to the 2021 album that the band put out. And it's got some beautiful. This is Martin Popoff, by the way, who's freaking him and Greg Prater, like the most prolific authors. I didn't know
he'd done a Maiden book. Cool.
He did a Maiden book, yeah. Oh man, it's so cool. You could feel the scratch marks on there.
Well, I'm a huge Maiden fan. I've seen him 3 times. I'm a big Maiden fan.
Oh, so. Okay. Yeah. And you know what I forget too is that they had Paul Di'Anno was on their first 2 studio albums.
Yep, sure was.
And he was more of like a punk rocker type of dude. And when Bruce Dickinson came in, it was like the perfect fit. So that one's coming up. I think I'm interviewing Martin on like September 2nd. So I'll get it out that week. Here's a wild one. Check this out. This is called Operation Gratitude, Kill Tom Parker. It's a fictional book based on Elvis and Colonel Parker and how this crazed fan decides she's tired of Colonel Parker ruining Elvis's life and she's going to do something about it. I'm not going to give away the ending. Now here's a good one. Jeff Apter's become one of my favorite guests. Super nice dude out of Australia. He's written a book. You talk about a guy who needs to be known, Carl Perkins.
Oh yeah.
So Petty's a big fan. He was a big fan
of the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles don't exist without Carl Perkins.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So Carl Perkins, I have that. There's more. There's actually this Saturday, I have an interview with an interesting young guy who's a musician who teaches songwriting. So it's going to be cool just to find out. Dan Spencer's his name. Okay. So that'll be cool. There's one, you talk about bands who I'm learning about, it's like an all-star band, the Continental Drifters, and it had members of the Bangles and a guy who worked with Hootie and the Blowfish and REM and all that. Really interesting story. This is like one of those stories of a band who just almost made it big time, but they're still going. And let me see what else. I mean, dude, I'm like booked with interviews through September. So, I mean, it's let's see, what do we got here? Looking through my calendar here. Sorry, this is on the spot. We're doing this on the spot. What else do we
We'll do it live.
We'll do it live. Oh my God. That's what's his name?
Yeah, the idiot face. I can't think of his name. He's an idiot. Bill O'Reilly.
Ken Womack and Ken Campbell wrote a book on Springsteen. Okay, all the albums, all the songs. Okay. Looking forward to that one. I think that's pretty. And I'm looking forward to having back on. He was on the old podcast, Discovery. Carl Weiser, he's the one who launched the great website Songfacts. Have you ever gone to songfacts.com?
Yeah, I use it all the time.
And he's right out of Connecticut, a fellow radio guy.
Okay.
He was on the radio. I remember I used to hear him on the rock station in Hartford. And so that's a great story because he just launched it and it just took off. Greg Prater writes articles for Songfacts and it's like the go-to. I have a few. He reached out to me for some Van Halen stuff. So you'll see if you go to Van Halen, my name's in there, like in a few of the entries.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's enough, right? I think
so. Lots coming up and lots to check out. And you've got 200 and how many episodes? You 270 something or
214 was the Kansas. So we're coming up on 215.
Yeah.
We had a great one on Tom Petty, and I think are they re-releasing the Petty book?
Conversations with Tom Petty was just re-released. Yeah. And I mean, I referenced that in pretty much every episode that I've ever done of this show.
Okay.
And had Paul.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, just a super nice guy and a brilliant musician in his own right too, actually.
And I'd love you. I'm sure you would love to have books by the other guys in the band. Mike Campbell should write one.
Yeah.
All of them.
I think
Ben Mott should write one.
That's the dream, right? Conversation with Mike Campbell by Kev Brown. That would be the dream.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Who was the one that I was telling you about that wrote the Tom Petty book? He also wrote a phenomenal book on
Warren Zanes.
Warren Zanes.
Yeah, I want to get.
Are
Warren
you
on at some
working on
point.
that one? I think. Yeah.
You sent me his contact details. Yeah.
Oh my God, dude! He wrote a book on Springsteen's Nebraska. Oh my God! And he went and interviewed Bruce at the house where Nebraska was recorded. Wow.
That's for the 33 and a third, right? I think that was in that series.
No, it was separate from the 33 and a third series. Yeah. And great guy. I mean, he was a guy, he was on CBS News, CBS Sunday, like the day after that, I was recording an interview with him. It was like a real trip, you know?
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Hey, listen, thanks so much, dude, for.
I was finally, we made this happen.
This has been an absolute blast.
Did we talk enough about Petty? Because it's a Tom Petty podcast. So.